Welcome to The Jig is Up. My name is Darcy, and yesterday we had the opportunity to do a live podcast with a group of panelists, and the conversation was about decolonizing Indigenous art. And we're not talking about decolonizing the art itself. What we're talking about is decolonizing the institutions that surround or are involved in the art world. And that includes your public governments, like the City of Calgary. That includes arts, organizations and nonprofits, to galleries, to anything like that. And essentially what I was trying to get to was, how do we get these organizations and these people to see how they're blocking or being gatekeepers against Indigenous art? And it's a tough conversation to fit into an hour. It really is. With the number of panelists we had, we could have easily done 2 hours, and I think it still wouldn't be enough to really dig into some of these issues. But I think we touched on a few issues that, for people to maybe explore further if they're involved in those areas of things, or if you're involved in a group that's talking about some sort of art or a mural. These are things that you need to sit down with Indigenous artists and talk to them, but more importantly, listen to them. And I think that's what's important about this panel discussion is for people to really truly listen to the artists. We had some amazing artists on there, and a couple of them I had not met before, and they just blew me away. They're absolutely amazing people. And so I'm really proud to bring you this, and I really hope that this, for some people, this maybe begins a conversation, and they can delve deeper and deeper into these issues, and we can start to see, less and less colonial attitudes when it comes to Indigenous art. So once again, I want to thank everybody who organized and volunteered for this event. There was a whole bunch of volunteers, a whole bunch of people organized it. It was great food, and it was just a lot of fun. So I hope you guys enjoy this conversation or this panel discussion on decolonizing Indigenous art. All right, so I just want to welcome everybody to the podcast, to The Jig is Up. The Jig is Up is a Métis-focused podcast dealing with Métis issues, people, culture, politics a lot, and things like that. So we're happy to be here with all these fine panelists to talk about decolonizing the arts. And I'm going to ask the panelists to go through, and we'll start over on this end and work our way across. Just do a couple minutes intro on who, your name, and I guess how you're related to the arts world. So, or in decolonizing. Yeah, go ahead. My name is Tim Fox. I'm originally from the Blood Reserve, and I live and work in Calgary. I work for the Calgary Foundation. I'm really honored to be on this panel, but I feel like somewhat of an imposter because I'm not really an artist. The work that I do at the Calgary Foundation is focused on systems change. So I'm trying to facilitate a change process in the world of philanthropy, and in a sense trying to decolonize what that looks like for charities, what that looks like for donors and volunteers. So that's, I guess, my connection today.
Hi there, my name is Patty Pawn. I'm the president and CEO of Calgary Arts Development, which is the local arts council here in Calgary. I am a settler here at Mohkinstsis, and it is my great pleasure and honor to call this place my home, the home of the Niitsitapi. And I love my city, I love my community, and I have the great honor of working with artists every day to make this a better place.
Hello, my name is Diana Frost. I'm an Algonquin Métis, originally from Quebec, and I am the founder of a social enterprise called Coloring It Forward. I make a series of Indigenous coloring books with artists and elders. And we're trying to make books that share all the beautiful and wonderful things that we should learn from our elders in efforts to try and help bring about reconciliation from an art perspective. And I'm very honored to be asked to be on this panel. Thank you.
My name is Ryan Jason Allen Willard. I'm from the Siksika Nation. We are part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And I am an artist, and I work in many mediums. I write stories, I do animations, I make paintings, murals, performances. I'm sure there's a few other things on the list that I haven't listed, but this is what I do. I'm heavily involved in the community, and I want to say thank you for sitting to listen to us.
Hello, my name is Caleb Teek Dan. I'm a local artist here in Calgary from the Blood Tribe. I was a local artist from here in Calgary. I'm from the Blood Tribe, Southern Alberta. I was raised here mainly in the city. I became an artist. I guess I started right out of high school. Now I work mainly in the community, and I do a lot of work through the Calgary Stampede. And basically, it's an honor to be doing what I love to do. I struggled to get to where I'm at, but it's nice to be a living, working artist. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Troy Patnode. My father's from the Métis Nation. My mother, she's from British ancestry. And my day-to-day job is very similar to Tim's job, although I work at Fort Calgary doing a very similar sort of job to Tim's. And I came into that work through art in a little bit of a roundabout sort of way, because for the last near 20 years of my life, I'm actually an art historian. My mom's an artist. I grew up with art. My research projects for various degrees in school were all actually about decolonizing the arts in Canada. And my last project specifically was about rewriting the master narrative of art in an indigenously oriented way. Thank you.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for being here. So I wanted to start off and just kind of establish what is colonization of Indigenous art from the different perspectives. So I don't know who wants to jump in first on that, but what does it mean when we talk about colonization of art? What does that look like? We'll start maybe at the end if you've wrote papers on it. We'll start with you.
Oh, no, I thought we were going to start with Tim again and work this way. Oh, gee. Well, of course, that's a really big question. And this is one of those questions that, I probably would answer that differently today than I did 4 years ago. And if you ask me that same question next week or 4 years from now, I might answer it a little bit differently. But for me, decolonizing the arts, right? That was the question.
Yeah,
what is that?
Well, what does it mean when we say colonization of Indigenous art? How are they colonized? Is it structures? Is it attitudes? What is that really like? What are we decolonizing? What does that mean?
For me, the way I would answer that, there's definitely structures in place. I might take those words, structures, attitudes, and put it this way, that there's structures in place. Sometimes we can't always see them or we're not always aware of them, but there's very much structures in place that keep this thing we called colonization alive. And if we think of it like a big boulder, a huge boulder, say, the size of Canada, with Indigenous peoples under this boulder and non-Indigenous people standing on top of the boulder. It's kind of like that. And these structures, so if you're standing on top of the boulder, you think your feet are on the ground. And physically, when you walk through the world, they might be, but your institutions, your minds, your beliefs, your values, the things you've been taught, your language, are actually all standing on this boulder. They're not on the ground here. And that boulder is on the backs of the Indigenous peoples here. And, I think of it that way. And so the arts come into that because it's one of the expressions or one of the symptoms of this big boulder in Canada on the backs of Indigenous peoples. It happens in the art world where so things like exclusion of Indigenous artists for a long time from art exhibitions and things like that. That's just a symptom of a much, much larger and much more deeply ingrained and embedded, problem that we might call colonization. That's just one symptom of it. So the art world's part of it, but it's much, much bigger than that.
Thank you. And I think Tim has a response to that too.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think when I think of the arts, I think of many different things. And I think lately I have been learning that the arts can be used for different tools. It could be used for education. It's so much more than just entertainment. And I've come to learn that over the past few years. And so I think considering arts as education, arts as advocacy, arts as all of these other things, I feel like it reminds me of a story. So last year in 2017, I attended a presentation by Leroy Little Bear. And in this presentation, Leroy Little Bear was talking about Canada 150. And he said that he was asked, so Leroy Little Bear is from the Blackfoot Confederacy, he's from the Blood Tribe, he's an elder, he's an educator, he works at the University of Lethbridge. And he was asked last year if he would be an ambassador of Canada 150. And so doing the work that he does, which is similar to mine and Troy's, it's systems change within the post-secondary sector, within the education sector. When he was asked to be an ambassador of Canada 150, he struggled with that at first, and he said, Canada 150 is somewhat of a point of contention for the Indigenous community because we have been impacted so negatively over the past 150 years. And he told them, if I'm an ambassador of Canada 150, I'm going to use that platform to tell that untold story, to tell that narrative, that hard piece of the history, that Canadian history from an Indigenous perspective. And they were okay with that. So he went on to use his platform to kind of be that voice for the Indigenous community and be that voice for change. And he said this last year. He said, he was talking about origin stories, and he was specifically talking about the origin story of Canada. And Leroy Little Bear said, every society in one way or another lays claim to a territory. Within the claimed territory, a culture arises from the mutual relationship with the land. A culture consists of paradigmic concepts, values, and customs. Paradigms are the tacit infrastructures members of a society utilize for their beliefs, behavior, and relationship. Every society, through its mutual relationship with the land, develops icons, symbols, and images that serve as repositories for the paradigms, values, customs, ceremonies, stories, songs, and beliefs of the people. These, in turn, are embodied into the very being of the people. And so he went on to parallel and connect that origin story with the origin story of Canada and how Canada is facing an identity crisis because we have the symbolic maple leaf, we have the Canadian flag, we have the Canadian anthem, but all of those things are missing values, beliefs, and customs from the original people that were here on Turtle Island. And so when I think about colonization of arts or colonization of anything, I think that there is a missing narrative to all of these stories, specifically when it comes to the arts. I have some friends and relatives who are performers and consider themselves artists. They are very concerned about our stories, our origin stories, and who's telling our origin stories. And even in academia, I think there are books written by professors and academics about Indigenous history. So I think people just need to be aware of who's telling these stories. Is it someone from a settler background? Even if it's from a post-secondary level, you can learn from books, but from which perspective are you learning from? And you can use art as education, but who's telling the story? And is it the voice of the people? I think too often it's we're learning that history, but from a different perspective, someone who doesn't have that lived experience, and then we're missing the values, the beliefs of that origin story. To me, that's what land acknowledgement is. It's so much more than just paying tribute to the people of that territory. It's kind of taking a deeper dive into that.
Awesome. And then from the artists on the panel here, when you guys are creating art and you're doing your thing, like how do you guys come across or do you have examples of times or systems where your art is, I guess, blocked or because is it not mainstream enough, or how have you kind of faced that barrier of I guess colonization?
I grew up in the city my whole life. I used to go visit my grandparents a lot. They told me a lot of the stories about the animals, about the past. before the white man came, and when the white man came. So I've heard horror stories, I've heard beautiful stories. Through art, I noticed in the beginning when I first started out here in Calgary, there wasn't a lot of interest, or people just didn't understand or have the knowledge of the Aboriginal culture. So it was a struggle to be an Aboriginal artist, and that was 25 years ago. I see the difference now through doing, like telling the stories of our people through my artwork, about the animals, about the past, and it's almost opened their eyes to our culture, our spirituality. Like I said in the beginning, it was a struggle being an artist because I think there wasn't that understanding. There was a lot of just the stereotypes that they believed, and so I had a lot of doors slammed in my face in the beginning, and now those doors have opened up, and it has changed quite a bit. So I'm able to make a living as an artist now than I wasn't before. Wow. And, but being able to tell the stories and for them to more understand than they did before, I think helped my career, and it's also helping a lot of the other artists that are telling similar stories. So,
okay. So I guess the next part of expanding on that is how we talk about decolonization. Is appropriation of art kind of an extension of that? Is it a part of that? And how does, because I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm inspired by this art, so I go do it, and it's very similar, and it's almost copying. So where is that boundary, I guess? Is appropriation part of that? Go ahead.
So there's a difference between two styles of artwork. There's native artwork and there's contemporary native artwork. Native artwork was ceremonial artwork that expressed what societies you were a part of, what bundles you carried, what pipes you carried, if you went through Great Famine, Great War, family logos, symbols. These were important things that was passed down to our people, and also it expressed the teachings that we carried as individuals, and that what we also gave. And then a lot of these teachings were lost, and then we have a lot of Indigenous people that are really reaching out to what we used to be. So we make contemporary native artwork, which expresses what we used to be, and we paint a lot about what the past is. And then we get stuck into a genre of I've given it a nickname. I call it stampede art, and it's when you are in order to make a buck, you have to paint what people want. You have to paint what is expected of us to paint. And so that's contemporary native artwork, but traditional native artwork is something that's been passed down. And there's a man in the Yukon that is a prime example of this. He's a Napiguan, which means white man in our language, and his name is Brian Walker. And he studied under the elders and got all the stories and all the rights passed down to him. And he is now one of the main artists that does all the copper work for the Tlingit people in the Yukon. So it's not based on your skin color. It's not based on where you come from. It's based on the rights and the teachings that you have. If you do not have the rights, you do not have the teachings, you should not be doing it. It's not based on being Blackfoot. It's not based on being Cree. If you carry the teachings, you have the right to do it. And that's traditional native art. There's Indigenous people in BC that paint Haida Gwaii artwork or West Coast style artwork, but a lot of that you have to have the rights passed down to you. And a lot of these people are just like, oh, hey, I'm a good painter. I'll paint West Coast art. But there's some people that are getting kicked off their tribes for painting West Coast artwork without having the rights to do that. These are things that get passed down. It's like running a sweat lodge. You can't pour on the rocks unless you have the rights to pour. It's just the way it is. You need to do the footwork. You need to earn your rights to do this stuff. It's not based on your skin color. It's about what you do and what you put into it.
Wonderful. Anybody else have anything to add to that? I think that was amazing. So when, I guess maybe for people that are maybe on the policy side of things, how do you go through systems that are already in place and try to figure out how to decolonize those? Is there processes that are ongoing within whatever organization you're with to do that? And maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think I'll speak predominantly from my personal experience with Calgary Arts Development, but knowing that we work with a number of organizations throughout the city structure. So our civic partners like Economic Development, Tourism Development, the City of Calgary's Public Art Program. It's not one we run, but we certainly are aware of, and I have an opinion. So I think about this systems change. It's true, and certainly what Tim shared earlier around what constitutes colonizing a system. You know, I guess from my perspective, it's about when a dominant culture imposes its tradition, its assumptions upon someone else's. So in this case, artwork. And so when, you know, Calgary Arts Development in the last couple of years, whenever we have a public event, we always do a land acknowledgement. Not because we're supposed to. And as I have delivered that land acknowledgement over time, one of the things that I've shared with a predominantly non-Indigenous community is when I say that, I say it because it reminds me that on this place, the presence of arts and culture has been here for thousands and thousands of years, 12,000 years that we know of, documented, and quite likely 15,000 years or more. So as this place's local arts council, where I am a champion for the arts, I am a champion for the arts that have been present here for 12,000 years, not for 150. And I would say that the system I have come into acknowledges the presence of arts here for 150 years. And its meaning is rooted in 150 years. So all of the things that we just heard about don't even come into our consideration. So we create a system that's a bit uninformed, really, that isn't taking into account the learning that could happen if you look at millennia of arts and cultural experiences. That takes into account the geographic place we are in, the influences that Mother Nature has provided for us, the coming together, the intercultural practices, imposed or otherwise, that have been created in this last 150, well, maybe 300 years, if you think about other parts of Canada. So that's the starting point for us when I think about this system that we wish to work in, that we aspire into. And so when you set those as your targets, as opposed to it's all got to be apples to apples, I got to be able to compare artists so I know I can justify why I gave that one a grant and not this one a grant, that it's not a competition, but that you get to talk about your practice, but I'm going to impose my assumptions about what art is, and then it gets worse when I say what good art is. So I want for us to expand that. And so that means asking. That means listening. That means being present and hearing. That means having humility. That doesn't mean having judgment and imposing your view. So that's a really different context for us these days.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to add to that, or no? Okay. So we had some, I guess, in the past year or 2 years, we've had some great city news about art and things like that, in case anybody hasn't read the newspapers. But the public art is really come under scrutiny from the City of Calgary. And I think in general, the City of Calgary's view in all departments of Indigenous art, Indigenous inclusion. From your guys' experience, is this are they starting to look at improving it? Is it starting to improve? Is it I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
So about, I guess, a year and a half ago, I met Mayor Nenshi, and I said to him, how come we don't have more Native artwork in our city? And he kind of was surprised, and he handed me a card for one of his public arts people. And I've been watching, and I'm happy to say that there is some movement. Calum and I and a bunch of other teams of artists are applying for some of the murals that are planned for the new City of Calgary Public Library. And they're looking for 3 murals that represent the Treaty 7 nations. So I'm happy to say that that's at least one opportunity. Now, one of the things that I'm concerned with is, are there people on the curation team that are Indigenous or have? And one of the issues I think as well is what Ryan was mentioning was, what's the preparation of these people for looking at this artwork? And I mean, if they're looking for art that's traditional, but they are not, they haven't been, working under elders, or they haven't been, in the traditions, and they've just gone to university and have some degrees, how does that impact their selection? How does that impact their assessment of the piece? And also I think it's a matter of who's going to look at the pieces, and how is that going to impact what pieces are chosen?
So when I was younger, I remember being in school, and when they would teach us about our people, it was very basic. We were nomadic people. We hunted buffalo, and we lived in teepees, and there wasn't really much to it. I really didn't know much about residential schools. I actually didn't know anything about it. I didn't know about any of this stuff. And then when I was 18, 19, I started to really sit down with the elders and learn their stories. And for a good year, I listened to a lot of the stories of what happened in the residential schools, and I started learning about colonialism and its impact on our people. And it built a fire within me. I was angry at the white people, but for once I was kind of happy with being Native. And so I was upset that they didn't teach people in the schools about this. And I have been given the honor to be painting in schools these days, and so I've been painting at a couple of schools, painting their murals, and I go in and I give teachings to the youth. But while I had been in there, this is elementary schools, and they're in there and they're teaching the kids about residential schools in elementary schools. And I remember when I was about 18 or 19 years old, and I was sitting there, and I was sitting with my friends, and I'd be like, wow, one day they'll be teaching residential schools, at least in the high schools. I said, never in the elementary schools. It's too much of it's a very deep thing to bring into the schools. It's very, very hard maybe for the kids to learn. But when I went in there and I seen all of the art all over the walls and all the things that were made, it almost made me want to cry, because I would never have expected this. It was such a surprise to me to see that the schools are actually doing that, and that the fact that they're bringing me in to smudge with them and to pray with them and to teach them our ways. And so this I thought was amazing, because it's a long time ago, we would never have been able to do that. And to be able to go into the schools and do this, and for them to be teaching the kids about residential schools and elementary schools, to me, that's a huge step. I know it might not be to some people, but to me it was huge. And so I do see it. I do see things changing. Might not be overnight. Personally, I would like to see us not driving cars and hunting buffalo, living off the land. But me, I'm a dreamer. That's never going to happen in my time, but that's what I would like to happen. But it's beautiful to be seeing that in the schools.
So two things come to my mind when I think of the City of Calgary and public arts and all that kind of stuff. And the first thing is clarity, and the second thing is policy. Because I think if the City of Calgary is commissioning an art piece and they are asking for it to be representative of the Indigenous people of that territory, they have to be really clear about that. And if they are being really clear about that, then they have to create a policy. I would call a policy from an Indigenous paradigm of thought and practice a relationship. They have to build some relationships with Indigenous communities. Because if they're clear about an art piece wanting to be reflective of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Treaty 7 territory, then they should be commissioning an artist from that community. Right now, as I understand it, the current policy that exists is they commission a piece of art and there's a call out and anyone can apply to that. And so if a non-Indigenous settler artist comes forward, does an art piece that's reflective of the Blackfoot Confederacy, then that's going to be questioned by the community. And it's just another example of what Patty was talking about when they're imposing their interpretation about who we are. And oftentimes it's a misinterpretation because they don't know the relationship to the land from that perspective. So when it comes to public art and art pieces, I feel like there is room to have both approaches. Art pieces should be commissioned for the broader community and artists from all over. But if you are expecting something to be representative of the Indigenous people of that territory, then you need to create a separate relationship or a separate means of carrying that out. So a policy. And it should involve consultation with elders and community members to guide that process, maybe to be a part of that selection committee, maybe even to work with the artist on some concepts. Because you run the risk of misinterpretation. And then I think we're just scratching the surface when it comes to a truth-telling movement, because then you see this outcry from the Blackfoot community saying this is wrong and we don't agree with this, and who did, but then the broader society has no idea where that uproar is coming because they don't know the legacy of loss, the legacy of misinterpretation that this community has been impacted by.
I think one of the things that I see a lot is that we talk about, they put out these bids for art, and they don't specify Indigenous, but I think the true problem is that in the case with the one on the west side of the city there is, without Indigenous input, it actually looks like something very negative within the Indigenous community. So to me, it is almost like, even if you're not looking for Indigenous art, it has to be something, there has to be people involved that would understand those traditions and say, well, this is what that looks like, so I don't really think that's a good idea. And like a check and balance. And to me, that's what decolonizing would be, is if we're going to be partners on this land, then we should be partners on things like that, where you get the decision to make like that. So I guess that's where I'm at with that. So what I know, there's a lot of nonprofits in the world, and there's private corporations, but in the nonprofit world, I think because nonprofits tend to do good things within the community, I think they think, oh, well, we're good, so but I find a lot of them, that's where a lot of the decolonization really needs to happen. I find the city of Calgary and governments, it's kind of a more public and more aware that they need to decolonize, but I think there's a lot of decolonizing that needs to happen in the nonprofits. So I don't know if you guys have any input on that as far as grants or just events like this one that we can maybe bring decolonizing into their realm?
You want to go first?
I feel like I'm expected to answer that.
Wait, you got to leave early, so we'll get you in first.
So, working at the Calgary Foundation, we support a lot of charities and not a lot of not-for-profits. So I have this kind of lens of this landscape of what's going on, and I feel like it's these grassroots organizations who are leading this decolonization process, because they are kind of taking this journey. I don't think that the responsibility of decolonization should belong to one sector. I don't think it should belong to the not-for-profit sector, the justice system, education, or human rights. I think it's a basic responsibility for everyone in society to take on this work and this responsibility. But I do believe that the grassroots organizations are playing a huge role in the journey that they are taking in terms of truth-telling. They are incorporating a lot of that historical context. We understand the deficit statistics, so not-for-profits work with statistics. That's the reason why they exist, to respond to a need. For the Indigenous community, we realize where the deficit statistics come from. Well, I realize, and we hear about them, high numbers of Indigenous people in the justice system, traditionally low high school graduation rates, and there's all of these deficits that we hear about, but we never take the time to understand where those deficits come from. And they come from somewhere, this shared history that we have with Canada, and I think not-for-profits are taking a step in scratching the surface behind that, and it's a hard thing to do, this truth-telling movement, but that's the first phase that's highlighted out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and even the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples report, and UNDRIP. It calls for everyone to work together, but you have to incorporate an element of truth-telling to understand why those deficits exist in the first place. I feel like, from my perspective, in the philanthropic world, I'm seeing that a lot from grassroots movements more so, and I do see it, hear it publicly from other levels of government, but I'm not too sure that they're taking the deep dives as much as the charitable sector is taking.
Yeah, I think, again, I work primarily with the not-for-profit arts community and with individual artists, so part of what we try to do is be an example, as well as I know I have a big hammer, which is, you don't get my grant if you don't do these things. And so it's about trying to find the balance, I think, in that. And, as I said earlier, around some of these systems that we have in place, they've been around for a long time. And sometimes for those who are the leaders, they come from a dominant culture predominantly, right? So you sometimes don't know what it is that you don't know. And if I'm going to ask you to think about 15,000 years and not 150 years, that's a whole lot of learning you got to do. So I think we have a good friend to our organization, Hal Eagletail from the Tsuut'ina Nation, and he says, I don't like the word reconciliation, I like the word reconciliation. And so when I think about that for my organization, I think about, okay, so on the one hand, we can be observers. I see a kind of landscape. I can raise issues where maybe organizations aren't undertaking that learning and that process. But also then I have these other tools at my discretion to use to try and encourage and incent, right? I want to be part of the solution. Like when I say, if I see an organization that doesn't have a relationship with Indigenous communities, is there a way we can help foster that? Is there a way I can be more than an ally, but actually a bit of an accomplice with First Nations to build those bridges? So I think that's something that not-for-profits do well.
Mm-hmm. You guys? No? Okay. So I guess before, we're going to open it up if you guys have questions. We have a mic here. We can come around if you want. Just let us know. But I guess some of the last things I want to get to, I guess, is from the artist perspective. What do you think? When you're going through your daily life, where are areas that you see, I guess, stumbling blocks where people are hooked on this colonization, or there's policies in place that don't allow for Indigenous arts to be as prolific as it should be, or as open as it should be? Do you still come across that, or is it Are those barriers still there?
I'm trying to, as I think I'd mentioned before, I'm trying to submit some proposals for the new murals at the library, and I'm finding sometimes it's a little bit, I was surprised to not get the reaction from my artist friends that I had expected. I didn't get a lot of responses, and I think part of it was the complexity of the application process that artists need to submit in order to be able to even qualify to be considered. I think it was a little bit daunting. Maybe I'm kind of making an assumption. It was a bit daunting. And then when I did get responses and people started to send me information, it was just, I guess perhaps there's a difference in when you've been an artist trained at a university, and they tell you have to, as you do art, you have to follow this process to document it. You have to take pictures like this, and you have to get the person's reference and all this stuff. And a lot of times we're finding it hard to get those things in retrospect, because they don't have good pictures sometimes of the murals or the artwork that they have made in the past. And I'm finding that the process for applying to get some of these grants sometimes is restrictive, and the artists are having a hard time submitting what is required to even apply.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys see those? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, with those applications, they're usually wanting to know that we're able to handle a large sum of money and spend it right, and that they're going to get the job done. So they want all the requirements, and they want the backup of it, and they want to know that you can handle all that money. And I was looking into it, and they don't really teach you that in the schools. It's kind of like once you get out, you just start applying for it, and you just keep getting better and better at it. And so it's something that you gotta learn for yourself. But yeah, I understand being Aboriginal. I consider myself somewhat of a guerrilla artist, so I've got a lot of the nice jobs and things that are good for a resume, but I'm not the best at throwing it together in a professional way. So I've had a lot of people, thank God I've got many friends in the art community that are constantly making applications and stuff. But mind you not, there's not a lot of Indigenous people out there that have my hookups. And so I feel for them, and I feel the application is a bit hard, because there's a lot of beautiful Indigenous artists out there that should have their art showcased, and the only reason they're not getting these jobs is because they don't have the experience to apply for it, and they have the will to do the art, but they don't have the experience to impress the callers. I call them the callers, or the people making the decisions, the ones that are handing over the checks. So I find it a little bit hard. I would think it would be great if the community organized like some sort of place where artists can go and get the help for that, so that they can submit that. Because a lot of Indigenous artists come from sometimes we come from a hard background. It's not all Native people lived a hard life, but the ones that I've been around have, and this one has. So it's kind of, I find it hard to be legit sometimes, and thank God I have the help to do it. I just, yeah.
Galen, did you have something to add to that, or?
Yeah, I've been an artist for 25 years in the city. I guess it was a struggle I applied for a lot of grants in the beginning and got turned down, probably because, I don't know, maybe I find that now I just got a grant and was accepted, and I utilized it for products and for my printing costs and things like that. But before I had to almost get well known before I got that grant. So it was, in the beginning, it was like I always got denied. And now that I'm kind of making waves in the art world and being recognized, I got the grant, no problem. So I find that there should be some kind of placement for artists to get, I guess, the help with their grants, because a lot of them, like Ryan said, they're just had hard lives. They're just coming out of school or whatever, and they don't have a clue that how tough it is to get a grant or to get approved for a grant. So, like I said, I've been approved and I've got more stuff on the go, but before I could get anything, I had to get my foot in the door. So.
Well, I guess that leads to another question I had when you guys are talking about these applications is, like traditionally, I think artists, you get your work put in a gallery, you do shows like that. Is that something that is available to Indigenous artists? Because I know when I go to most art galleries, I don't see any Indigenous art. And so I don't know if that's,
Well, again, the thing is, I think before I got into a lot of the galleries that I'm in now, I had to get my name out there first, right? So it's a struggle for up-and-coming artists to get their work out, because they don't know how to approach the galleries, and you have to have a body of work, which they don't know how to put together a body of work or things like that. So it's a struggle for them, for sure.
Yeah.
When I first started my coloring book thing, I went into one of the big art galleries in town here, and I talked with the owner, and the owner said that he didn't have a lot of Indigenous art in his gallery because he wanted to work with artists that were healthy and didn't have addictions, and he was struggling with this. And I went, wow, that's like a big stereotype right there. Yeah. So I think that's another of the issues, is just stereotypes regarding artists themselves. And
well, they also
two examples sitting right beside me here of healthy artists.
Well, the reliability, they also too, a lot of galleries want an artist that they can rely on, and that's what they're worried about mainly. I guess they would say a healthy artist, but if like I said before, I got any grants or any projects, I had to build my name up and build a notoriety where I could be trusted. And once I was trusted, now I can make a phone call right now and get somebody to send me $1,000, no problem. When before I couldn't get that. Yeah. So you have to get your notoriety to begin.
Yeah.
I think it's also an issue if the art gallery doesn't currently have patrons that are looking for Indigenous art in the gallery, and then the art is just going to sit there, and then the artist doesn't get paid for months, years, and sometimes that's a struggle too.
Is there enough places, I guess, where people can buy Indigenous art? I know there's maybe one or two places in Calgary that you can actually just go, and even if it's just prints but there's not a lot of, I don't see a lot of places with Indigenous art for sale, is that?
Yeah, that's another big thing. There's only a few galleries, depending on where you are. Edmonton has a few native art galleries, almost the same as Calgary, not too many, but the different regions you go to Toronto, there's more native art galleries. You go down to the States, there's a native gallery on every corner. But you know what I mean? It just depends on the region you are, right? Yeah. Also, too, in the States, they honor all their artists, right? And it's easier for their up-and-coming artists to make a living because there's a community of artists. Yeah. Here, there's no community artists. We're building a community artist right now.
Wow.
There's a very nice collection at Alberta Branded in the Alberta Legislature building there. And if there's any Indigenous artists or Métis artists or listening to this call, they do calls for artists all the time, or not all the time, but every now and then. And so I would invite you to look them up.
Okay. We'll open it up to, if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand and my daughter will come around and give you the mic, but we'll just keep talking until is there a question back there? Okay, we'll head back there.
Hi, my name's Florence Schoen, and I came from Edmonton this morning, primarily to see Alex Jambier, also to come here and listen to you guys speak. So thank you very much. I'm an artist, and I'm an emerging artist. So I guess I just wanted to kind of comment. Not really comment, but just agree with what you guys were saying about how hard it is to kind of get your foot in the door if you're an emerging artist. I didn't go to art school. I paint. I can't stop being an artist. Like, all my money goes to supplies. I don't really show my art because, you know, there's nowhere to show it. Like, there's one gallery in Edmonton, which is Bear Claw. There used to be Sun and Moon, but it went under. So, like, this whole, like, I really admire what you guys are doing. Like, I'm always looking on Facebook and, you know, and you're always set up here and there, Caleb, and I just think, wow, like, I wish there was something like that in Edmonton, you know, like a collaboration of artists where we can kind of support each other. And I am looking into that call out. It's actually coming up.
You can join our community, you're welcome.
Yeah, it's a quick drive. So anyways, I just wanted to say that, so thank you, because I'm running off to see Alex now. But
awesome. And if anybody has any specific questions for anybody up here, feel free. Is there another question? Is there another question back there? No? Okay. So I guess we're going to try to start wrapping it up a little bit.
There's another question.
There's another question. Go ahead.
It's not really a question, though.
Go ahead.
I just want to say I think it's a great idea that people are talking about getting an art collaborative together here in Calgary. Many years ago, there was the Calgary Aboriginal Arts Awareness Society that Joan Cardinal Schubert was the chair of, and I was part of that board, and that was a really awesome society. It was an advocate group for Aboriginal artists here in Calgary, and it was a nonprofit as well too. So that's food for thought. I think like up in Nunavut, they have a Aboriginal art cooperative as well too. So that's a possibility, you know, different Indigenous artists getting together and getting a co-op going. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up.
Dorothy, I wonder if I could just add, there's one other, I hope, opportunity, and will be guided by the community. Calgary Arts Development just brought together an Indigenous Artist Advisory Circle. And the first thing that we asked for their help on was to create an Indigenous Artist Grant Program. It's called the Original Peoples Investment Program. And we'll launch that in the fall. But all of it, from the guidelines to the application process to the assessment process and who decides, will be guided by this advisory. And my hope is that the advisory will continue beyond that. I hope that the rest of our grant programs, for example, change because of the guidance and the advice we receive. We are open to possibilities. So if a community of Indigenous artists needs a meeting space in the downtown, come use our boardroom. I don't care what you do in it, but it's about creating community. So please contact us if you would like to have suggestions that we can make to the advisory, perhaps be a part of the advisory at some point, and then we go from there.
Awesome, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I would just like to add to that for the Calgary Foundation as well. We are constantly trying to work with many great projects, and so for any artists out there, we are trying to respond to our systems and make our application process as easy as possible. We have, for community grants, I mean, it has to be associated to an organization with a charitable number. You have to be considered a designated donee. But we're more than happy to sit down with artists to see if you have a great project for community, and if it falls into one of our areas. Actually, it doesn't even have to fall into one of our areas. We consider ourselves a 360-degree funder, meaning we'll look at any kind of application. But I would offer the same invitation, Patty, for the Calgary Foundation, just to contact us to see if you want to have a further discussion on how we can support the great work that's happening.
Awesome. And I guess we're getting short on time, but I just wanted to wrap up, and I don't know if we just want to go through the panel again, if anybody's got some final comments about, because what I want people to take away from this is what can they do, walk out of this room, and okay, what does that mean to them now? How do they move forward and, I guess, progress decolonizing the arts in this case? So I really appreciate what these artists have to say and to be so honest about the barriers and the challenges that they face. I think there's, so Cindy Blackstock does a lot of advocacy work for children. And she said that there's this dichotomy that exists of the savage and the civilized, the savage being Indigenous people, the civilized being non-Indigenous people. We really need to break that dichotomy. And in order to do that, we need to kind of
dig deep into this context that's missing and why this thought pattern exists in the first place about the Indigenous community, that we're lazy, we're not reliable, we're not honest and all that kind of stuff. And the other thing about the Indigenous people is we're humble. So I can imagine it's hard for an artist to kind of talk about what they have achieved and accomplished, because that's not what we're taught to do. We're taught to be humble and stay humble. So there needs to be all of this context setting and truth telling, and that conversation, that dialogue has to be hosted between Indigenous people, the arts community, and all that kind of stuff. We just have to really get rid of our what we have been taught to believe about the Indigenous community, I think, in general.
I think there's two things that come to mind immediately. One is if you're someone who's not familiar with any of the forms of Indigenous or Native art that you've heard about today, Google any one of these artists, and you'll see a whole body of wonderful work. The Glenbow Museum just opened an exhibition last night featuring 60 years of work by Alex Janvier, and it is spectacular. And I think when you see the descriptions and you see the work, it starts to connect how 15,000 years of a history is being expressed through this voice. So there are those things. And then I think it's also, I hope that Calgary Arts Development is, as I said, an accomplice, that we are about reconciliation. And I don't know. So I hope that we are a place where you can feel welcome to come and tell me if you think maybe there's a better way for us to do this. Or through the Indigenous Artist Advisory, that there might be an artist on that circle that could work with you. We have 3 elders who are also a part of that circle, so we're really trying to make this as much of a learning journey for us. And I worry sometimes that I'm the grantor, and therefore I don't want to tell them something they're doing wrong. And I guess all that to say, I actually know I'm doing stuff wrong, and I'm trying to figure out what to do that is right. And I don't have the answer, so I would welcome that input.
The first thing I wanted to say is that I'm really glad we're having this conversation. And to have all of these wonderful people on the panel. I'm also very glad to participate in the Wildrose United Church's awesome art festival that honors and respects Indigenous artists. And I hope there will be more festivals like this, because this really helps to introduce all these different forms of artwork to the general population. And I think we need that more than anything. I think that is one of the best ways to decolonize Indigenous art.
The question was, like,
what can people do walking away from this conversation to, I guess, promote decolonization moving forward, or what can their impact be?
I guess go out and engage yourself in our culture, learn as much as you can, be genuine when it comes to that, support it if you can. And I think educating yourself about our people is probably the most important thing. The more you know about our people, the more better the relationship gets between non-Indigenous and Indigenous people. I always hear people, they're always angry. They're always saying they're angry at the white people, but nowadays it has nothing to do with the color of skin. It's the mentality. You can be Native, or you can be Chinese, black, white, but if you carry that mentality, the mentality that colonized our people, that is the mentality that I feel that people need to steer away from. And I think that when people educate themselves on our people, they slowly decolonize the mind, and they have a better relationship with themselves and spirit, and they start to have a better relationship between non-Indigenous and Indigenous people of Canada. So I think that would probably be the best step, is educating themselves. There's one thing, like, I know that he was saying that our people, we were proud and we were very humble people. And I used to always see all these pictures of our people carrying pipes into pictures and wearing their colors and stuff. And I started asking around about that to some of my elders, and they said, well, a long time ago we were a very proud people. You would walk around the tribe and you would be able to look at somebody and you knew exactly what society that person was part of, what pipe that person carried, what bundle that person carried, what war they went through. You knew everything but just looking at them with their outfit. And then colonialism came to our people, and they told our people that we were show-offs, but really we were proud. And we would talk about our accomplishments, and we would tell people about it, and we would go around and we would tell everybody in the tribe about this. But through colonialization, they told our people that we need to humble ourselves and that we were show-offs, and we weren't to be like that. So we were told to humble ourselves. But in reality, we were very proud people. So that was a part of decolonization, and I think the other step is being very proud of who you are and being very proud of your accomplishments. I think it would be a little hard right now to walk around wearing your medallions and your outfits and stuff, because I don't think people are ready for that quite yet. But there was a time that we were like that. So educate yourselves.
Wonderful.
Just keep supporting the arts, Native art. We're all human beings.
Nice.
Yeah, the only thing that I really have to add to everyone else's great answers really is, for me, colonialism comes down to a triad of things really. It comes down to dispossession, dependency, and oppression, and it's and those things haven't gone away. So one of the first steps, in terms of this education for me, is to have non-Indigenous people realize that we live in a shared reality, and these things aren't just things from the past. They're alive and well right now today. Lands and Indigenous peoples are still being dispossessed from their lands. Dependency is being created because of that, and this is all within this, existing within this very much alive and a well sphere or mentality of oppression, with racism very much a part of that. So that's very alive and well, and I know Canadians really don't like to look at themselves that way through those lenses, but a lot of this work needs some courage to start identifying how these things are being alive and well in each of our own families, organizations, ways of life, and it's gonna, if we follow those threads, it's gonna take us through some really dark, ugly kinds of things. But so you don't have to do it if you don't want to. But if you're really serious about the work and you really actually do want to do something a little bit different, I think that having the courage to start seriously identifying how your organizations and ways of life and families, communities, so on and so forth, still contribute to this day to dispossession, dependency, and oppression. That would go a long way.
Wonderful. Well, that's awesome. I want to thank all the panelists for being here. Tim had to leave a little bit early, but I want to thank you guys for being here. I'm going to get this podcast up tomorrow, and it'll be on iTunes. It'll be on Google Play, whatever you want to listen to. And it'll be on our Facebook at the Métis Podcast. So if you guys want to listen, or you want to share it with friends, please do so. But I want to thank everybody for being here. It was great, and I hope everybody else enjoyed it. So thanks. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you guys got maybe some insight. For those of you in the arts world or in any world, really, take these topics and things that were discussed back to the organizations you're involved in, and see how you can maybe, affect change within your organization to be more inclusive and more equitable when it comes to Indigenous art or Indigenous anything, really. So I want to thank everybody that was there, all the panelists. They were wonderful, and I want to thank them for their input, their insights. I want to thank everybody that organized and volunteered for this event. It was an amazing event, and I wish you guys could all have been there. I had a lot of fun. My daughter had a lot of fun. So, again, just an absolute thank you to everybody involved. If you guys enjoyed this show and you want to get more stories and more of the interviews that we do, head over to our Patreon page. The link will be in the description. And for as little as $5 a month, you can gain access to all the exclusive content that we put up there. But for as low as $1 a month, you will start getting the rewards that are listed on that Patreon page as well. One of the big rewards that I want to keep pushing is the fact that we're going to plant trees for people. So for $10 a month, every single month that you donate $10 a month, we're going to plant a tree in what was an old cut block, and we're trying to bring back the species of tree that was native to that area. They've reseeded it with trees, but only one type of tree. And as we know, that is not how forests work. There is not one type of tree, especially in Alberta. So we're trying to put it back to the way it was, and we'd like your help. So for $10 a month, that's what we're planning on doing. But you can see all the rewards that we have on those pages. Anything over $10, we're still going to plant a tree. You just get more rewards. So I appreciate you guys going over and checking that out. I just want to say we have a new website up. If you want to go to www.métispodcast.ca, then you can check out our website. It'll have all the latest episodes there, plus it has our Twitter feed and a few other things there. You can sign up for our email list if you want to get on our email list. You can check out our blog, all sorts of things there. So check that out, and we appreciate your support. We appreciate your help. And until Tuesday, the jig is up.
You are the spark that's starting a fire that will spread across this land, and it will be a fire